Now, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Our speaker today is Nikki Sebastian, and I'm going to introduce her, and then I'll have her take over. Okay, so Nikki Sebastian is originally from St. Louis, Missouri. She graduated from Tulane University with a BA in American History, and she received her master's in Public Health Informatics from Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health in Atlanta in 2017. Ms. Sebastian is currently an IT specialist with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In 2020, Nikki was awarded the Board of Certified Genealogists, BCG's first ever Paul Edward Sluby African American Scholarship developed to encourage more African Americans to enroll in one of 5 premier national genealogical institutes on their way to becoming certified genealogists. In 2021, Nikki selected the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy and then enrolled in the ProGen monthly self-study program in preparation to submit her portfolio of work to the Board for Certified Genealogists. Nikki is a member of several lineage societies in memory of her ancestor, Private Thomas Smith, Company H, the 50th Regiment, Colored Troops Infantry. She is a member of Daughters of Union Veterans of the Civil War and the National Society Daughters of the Union, where she is a member director. She is the membership director in her local Atlanta chapter. Nikki is also a member of the Atlanta chapter of the Georgia State Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. Nikki enjoys writing about regular people engaged in life-changing historical events. She is currently preparing a package to nominate her ancestor trainer, Hark West, to the National Museum of Racing Hall based in Saratoga Springs, New York. Nikki has published several articles for the St. Louis Genealogical Society Quarterly and has presented at various genealogical workshops and conferences. So, without further ado, Nikki, and let me go ahead and bring up your presentation.
Thank you, Monica.
So excited for you to join us today.
Right, to our second virtual.
Yep, this is only our second virtual program. So
I didn't know that. She didn't tell me that till just now. This is our first.
Yes, so thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Nikki, you're all set?
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'm gonna go on mute, and just let me know if you need anything.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining me today for my topic that I want to talk about today is exploring your roots, a conversation to the Black Emory Impact Circle. Start my timer, so I'm on time. I am very excited to share with you all today my genealogical journey. And I want to provide examples of the kind of information that people, not necessarily that I have discovered, but information that people that I know, my colleagues, my friends have discovered about their families, and provide encouragement and inspiration to each one of you who have joined us today in your own research journey. I want to help to illustrate why it's critical that we conduct genealogical research on our families now, today. And next slide, please. And the agenda that I have, I want to spend the beginning kind of talking about the different stories, what I found, and some of the strategies that some of my colleagues that they use that hopefully would be useful to you all as well. I want to plan out everything I want to talk about, so I'm trying to stay on track, so that's why I have this little time box here. And about 5:45 or so, 40 or so, I'll leave some time for questions as we wrap up, if you would so like to do that, to ask questions. All right, so let's begin to define genealogy. What is genealogy? Genealogy is the study and the tracing of your family lineage, your history, your ancestry. It involves researching historical events, oral traditions, conducting genetic analysis, DNA analysis, and other sources to establish familial connections and to document your family trees. Genealogists investigate births of family members, marriages, deaths, migration patterns for our families and other life events to create a detailed picture of a family's past. Genealogy can serve various purposes for all of us. It can help us grow in personal discovery, learning about your ancestors, your cultural roots, your historical background. And it also, when you do this type of work, it also helps you to preserve your unique family history, because all of us has a unique family story. And it's very important that we record stories from our families and traditions, and also preserving our heritage for future generations. Genealogy is also important for legal and even inheritance matters. Sometimes we have to establish lineage for inheritance claims, for citizenship, even for if you find out you have Native American ancestry, to support documentation for tribal membership. And I'll talk about that. I know people who have done that. I also, excuse me, I also know people who work on military repatriation cases where remains of soldiers, of military people have been discovered but not identified. I know people who work on cases like that and match the remains to public databases, for example. And for DNA and genetic research, exploring connections and tracing your ancestry through DNA. And all of the stories don't have to be sad like the military story, but it can be a lot of happy cases where adoptees are finding their parents. And I've helped a friend, a neighbor do that as well. So why, next slide, please. And I think, yes, there we go. Thank you. So why genealogy? Why do we want to do this? And I'm going to dig into the different stories that I've discovered from colleagues, research colleagues. So why would anyone like to share about why genealogy is important? I can ask you all questions if anyone wants to chime in real quickly about any of you feel why you think genealogy is important or why you're here today.
I can chime in. My name is Felicia, and I'm a native of Atlanta. And genealogy is really important to me because I'm in the middle of discovering and helping a particular neighborhood that has been gentrified. I have a great great aunt. A building and several streets are named after her. But it's like there are people in the community who have not acknowledged that she has descendants. And my family is part of the settlement of free African American slaves in Reynoldstown, Georgia.
Oh, wow.
And so just looking to connect the dots for that.
I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but thank you. Please put that in the chat. I do want to find out more about that. But yes, that is a reason why genealogy is important.
Mhm.
And I saw someone said in the chat about medical research as well. It is very important because when you find death records for your ancestors, you can see why they died, what killed them. And a few years ago, I was struggling with diabetes, not diabetes, but pre-diabetes. And doctor had on my case about diabetes. You need to keep your numbers down. And I saw ancestors, like 3 generations, they all died of diabetes complications. So, and I didn't know that about them. So it does, some things can be genetic. So why genealogy? Why do we want to study this? Well, I'll start again as right in my bio. I am an American history major. And in 1860, for example, I'll start there. There were nearly 500,000 free African Americans, free Black people living in the United States, with the majority, well, obviously residing in the North, but a significant number also lived in the South. And very likely that you have an ancestor that was free. And that normally goes against the narrative that a lot of us are raised with. For example, that we're taught slavery. If your skin is Black, if you're Black, that means your ancestors were all 100% slave. Now, yes, obviously we will have that, we will find that, but the reality is you will find all types of things in your family history. And some of that can be, and I'm sure for 100% of us would be, you would be one of those. Your ancestors probably would be in that number. And so you have to ask yourself, was everyone enslaved or was everyone free? Some people say, I didn't have anybody enslaved and they're Black. I've had conversations with people like that. I personally have found several. I found relatives in West Virginia I saw them noted by name in St. Louis, Missouri. So you can tell if they were free. It's not going to say they're free, but if you see your ancestor by name listed on an official record, that's a fairly good indication that they were free people. For example, I have a colleague, her ancestor was Dr. Thomas Stewart, and he was America's first free Black 18th century rural physician, and he practiced in Dinwiddie County, Virginia, for example. And as you're probably aware, many free Blacks gained freedom through manumission, through self-purchase. Some ran away, some had military service, while others were born into free Black families for generations. And that's also a lot we don't hear about, that we weren't taught about. And I'm starting out with that just to say that slavery is not necessarily the first, the middle, nor the last word in the cumulative experience that all African Americans have in the United States. And speaking of slavery and self-emancipation and manumission, I wanted to talk about the Christiana riots of 1851. Has anyone heard of that? The Christiana riot of 1851 in Christiana, Pennsylvania? Nope, see, me neither. I never heard of it either. But I knew of someone, this was her family, and her family was involved in that. And the only way she knew about it because she was searching her family history. And a lot of times you will find out American history only by looking at your family, by looking at your family's records. Because sometimes the stories that you find your family involved in aren't published. They aren't put in history books. They aren't put in the newspapers. They aren't discussed. They're kind of hidden or kind of hidden away for whatever reason. But for this example, the Christiana riot of 1851 was a violent resistance against the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And it happened in Christiana, Pennsylvania on September 11th, 1851. And that event that none of us have ever heard of, that event marked the most significant act of defiance against slavery and federal law before the Civil War. The Fugitive Slave Act, for example, mandated that escaped slaves be returned to their ancestry. Even if they crossed the water, they made it to Ohio, they made it to free states, the fugitive slave law said they had to be returned because they were property. And the gentleman, there's the man, I guess, in the boots, I believe that's supposed to be Edward Gorsuch. And Edward Gorsuch was a slaveholder from Maryland. And he tracked 4 of his escaped slaves to Christiana, Pennsylvania, which was a stronghold of abolitionist sentiment and home to many free Blacks and Quakers who opposed slavery. And Gorsuch came to that town. He had his nephews with him. He had federal marshals with him, kind of coming up to this town to claim his escaped slaves from the home of William Parker, which is the name of the man who owned the house. And he was a free Black man and abolitionist, and he helped protect fugitive slaves. I guess this house might have been on a stop on the Underground Railroad, for example. And to make a long story short, Mr. Gorsuch did not return home to Maryland. He didn't make it back. And the men were tried, the community members, Black men were tried, and they were not charged, they were not convicted for the murder of William Parker. And again, I never heard this story, Christiana. That was never taught in school, but I only knew that because I having a conversation with a woman who told us that. So that's the kind of things you can find out with genealogy, for example. Has anyone heard of, if you're from Louisiana, has anyone heard of Marie Coin? Is that name familiar to anyone? No one? No? Well, there's another woman that I wanted to talk about that was discovered. She has descendants walking alive today, both Black and white. She was an enslaved woman, formerly enslaved. She gained her freedom, and she was from Africa, and her parents were African. She was born in the U.S. She was born here in Spanish colonial Louisiana. She petitioned the Spanish crown for the right to own land in her own name. And she eventually became a landowner of over 11,000 acres, I was told. She was a businesswoman and matriarch of a well-known multiracial Matoyer family, which is, they have their base in Natchitoches, Louisiana. And I've met several people who are descendants of the Coin. And if your family's free and if you're from Natchitoches, for example, Louisiana, you're probably related, probably to this family. And that name, Coin, for example, means born on a Tuesday. So that her name, her traditions have been passed down orally through the family down to this day. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. Did you all know that Cherokee Chief John Rogers, if you all have heard of him, he has Black descendants. I think some of you are aware that there is a close tie between African Americans and Native Americans. A fellow daughter of the American Revolution member, DAR member, Nikki Sewell Smith, was able to attain her Cherokee Nation citizenship because she was a descendant of a Chief John Rogers Jr. and who had children with her fourth great grandmother, Annie Mae, and resulted in their daughter, Martha Mae, who became a teacher. I didn't know about John Rogers. I hadn't heard of that, but I, again, learned of this story, this American history story, by a friend of mine, a society member with me who studied her family, who shared her story. So what you all have to do, you have to find your stories, you have to share them, because that's how you educate the community, how you educate your country about American history. This other lady in the corner, Nancy Ward, I am good friends with her Black descendants. She was born about 1738. She was also a member of the Cherokee clan. The Cherokees had different clans scattered about the United States, kind of a federated group of tribes. I believe that's the correct terminology. But she earned her status as a beloved woman. Apparently, that's the highest honor in the Cherokee tribe after distinguishing herself with service in the American Revolution. So I have Black friends who joined the Daughters of the American Revolution through a Native American female, which is unheard of, which is wild. And when we found out her story, she got a standing room applause when we heard about her ancestor being a Native American female, because women are often difficult to find in the first place, and for you to find a Native American woman is just a miracle, just incredible. The last lady that I have here in the middle, her ancestor's name was Quirk Martin, and her ancestor was from Ghana. And he first appeared in the American history records in 1777. He enlisted in the Revolutionary War in Halifax, Massachusetts to serve in the Revolution. He served under George Washington, and he was present during Benedict Arnold's defection, she says. Carol was able to find out, Carol Hector Harris is her name, my friend here, and she was able to travel back to Ghana to meet her Ghanaian cousins who still had the genealogy of her ancestor Quirk. And I will add to this, there were over 5,000 Black and Native Americans who supported the American Revolution as well. And if you descend from those, you are eligible for these different types of lineage societies. And lastly, why genealogy? Has anyone heard of the Battle of Fort Blakely? Another Civil War battle? Probably not. I'm going to assume we have not, because I have not, and I'm a history major. But yep, nope. So the Battle of Fort Blakely in Alabama was this battle. I know we've seen the movie Glory, that was in Massachusetts. This battle was in Alabama to fight over the area of Mobile. And there were 5,000 Black soldiers in the US colored troops who fought at Fort Blakely. And these regiments were used as the final assault on Confederate defenses. And this battle, a lot of times, is dismissed by historians, because it was primarily a lot of thousands and thousands of African Americans who were vital to the victory. But this battle happened hours after General Lee, Robert E. Lee, had surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. But even though he had surrendered, there was still fighting. The word had not reached all of the rest of the states who was still fighting. So when you talk about this battle, you don't hear about it, or people say, oh, the war was already over, so that battle doesn't matter. But the Battle of Fort Blakely, and it is a park in Alabama, a state park in Alabama where you can go visit, and the history is all documented there. but we always hear about the largest Civil War battles, Antietam or Pennsylvania. What's the battlefield in Pennsylvania? I'm drawing a blank, the huge one. But you hear about those, but we never hear about Fort Blakely, where the majority of soldiers were Union soldiers. Yeah, from Mobile. From Mobile, Alabama, you never knew this. But yes, the Battle of Fort Blakely. Check it out. It was in 1864. And the only reason I knew about that battle is because I found my ancestor, and my mother just happened to let it slip one day that, oh, well, you know, we had a Civil War ancestor, and he lost his eye, and he was injured in the Civil War. I was like, well, I didn't know this. You know, I studied genealogy. Why are you just throwing random stuff at me? You know, this is important. So I did find him in the hospital. So he was not at this battle, but he was at his unit. His 50th company H 50th regiment was at one of the units at this battle. Gettysburg, yes, thank you so much, was at this battle. So that's how I knew of this battle, the battle for Mobile, the battle which was overall the battle for the Mississippi River, which is why it's a very critical battle that we never talked about in school. And the last picture that I have here is about the Georgetown Memory Project. And if you, let's see, did I go to the next one? Oh, the next one, excuse me, I lost my page. The last picture that I have is an old man who was a descendant, a former slave who was a descendant of 272 slaves that Georgetown University sold in order to keep the university financially afloat in 1838. Oh, wow. Wow, thanks, Vicki. In 1838, Georgetown was run by the Maryland Jesuits, and they were struggling. They could not make ends meet. They would have to either sell these slaves or they would close the university. And that was a choice they were faced with. And it was the Georgetown sale was the most significant transaction involving enslaved people by the Catholic Church in the United States. And they have established a Georgetown Memory Project to trace the lineage of these 272 individuals. And it's actively going on and happening. They're trying to identify people because Georgetown is offering free tuition to descendants, as explained by her name is, I don't want to mispronounce it, Melisandre Short Column. And I met her at a conference, and she mentioned, yes, that Georgetown generously is offering free tuition, but it's free tuition only. There's no books, there's no housing, there's no meals there. And we all know, being Emory graduates, we know how expensive cumulatively, university is. So it's an ongoing program, but this is why you want to study genealogy, because you uncover stories about this. And again, these stories are people who found the documents, they trace our family, and they found bits and pieces of American history that we don't know unless we do genealogy. So next slide, please. I have given you a lot of examples, and maybe, you never know, if you dig far enough or you start looking in the right place, you may find that you could be connected to any of these stories. And you can know by asking relatives. And I have more stories to share. I have tons of stories, but I do have a time limit that I'm keeping track of. I'll be happy to return and continue this and have more stories to share. But you're probably wondering, how did these people discover these stories? How did they know? How did they find this? It's this crazy stuff. But in a lot of us didn't know these stories until we were adults. Our grandparents didn't tell us, parents didn't tell us, they just happened to find it themselves. We were not taught these stories about these places, about these battles in school or even in college. And a lot of us just started with oral family histories. And our parents told us, we're in this place and that place. And we go to that place and look up records and look up the names that we were told. And it just becomes a snowball. And the key to success, what you have to do is you have to look for names that you are given. You have to look in the places that you were told, and within the time frame that you were told, because you can't look for people in a place where they left 20 years before. So we kind of have to have a strategic plan about where to look and how. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite quotes from Damon Young, and I ran into this a few years ago, and I personally completely agree, and I wanted to share that with you all to kind of give you some motivation, again, more encouragement. And he says, if you are alive today, and if your life is the eventual product of people who hundreds of years ago were born and died and changed, your existence is a blankety blank miracle. You can figure out what the word was. And he goes on to say that they were able to live long enough and through all of that blankety blank horror to still produce and continue life is a blankety blank miracle. And that they went through all of that and still able to have a half a millennium later, have a legacy through you is a miracle, a blankety blank miracle. And it's still a miracle, even if you don't recognize their fight or you don't know of their fight, you're yet to find out, and their existence is miraculous. I wanted to share that with you as well. So for the next slide, please. The next slide that I have is that I want to reiterate that for African Americans, genealogy is not a hobby. A lot of times you hear about people studying genealogy. Oh, I'm retired. I got time to go to a conference, genealogy conference. I can go sit down in the library, spend a few hours because I'm retired. I don't have to, I can devote time to that. For us, it's not a hobby. We can't wait till we're 70, 62, 65. We have to interview people, our relatives, while they're around, while they're still alive. We just can't wait. It's the time is of the essence for us to find out our information. We can't wait to start in our golden years. This genealogy is a lifelong pursuit. You learn about it. You get better as you go. You don't just start and know, oh, everything will fall into your lap. It is a skill set that you learn. It's a lifelong pursuit and and something that we should seriously dedicate our time to, not as a hobby, not approach it as a fun hobby. And we cannot assume also that access to the records that we need will always be available forever. Records get destroyed for whatever reason. They're no longer available to us. Archives shut down. They close how many days of the week that they're open. They limit their hours that you can go find that. Hurricane Katrina, for example, records were destroyed when Hurricane Katrina. I had my friend Michael Henderson, a friend of mine, an author, and he's also in Sons of the American Revolution. He gathered a lot of records to find about his ancestor, Agnes, how she was free slave, and she lived as a free woman. She died a free woman, and he found all of her records, but the records were destroyed that he already captured and documented, of course, but the originals were destroyed in Hurricane Katrina. And then look at California, where natural disasters just constantly put our records at risk. And also historically, there were courthouse fires. And a lot of times you'll run into your families from a burned county, is what it's called, that there's no files for your family because someone came in and torched the courthouse, which was really a common practice. And especially during the Civil War with Sherman's raid through the South, a lot of courthouses were targeted, or a lot of courthouses were targeted anyway because people want to burn down land records. People just do all kinds of crazy things about why. And then also, many families still have records in their home, in their attics, and they don't know what to do with, for example. And sometimes when these people die, their records get put out on the curb when people pass away. Or people have the records and they're like, oh, I know it's important, but I don't know what to do. And so things happen that way. People don't get their records to where they can't be protected, like at local archives or local libraries. So I'm saying all this just to urge you to not procrastinate and do not wait. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. Do your children, your grandchildren, do they know their story? If they don't know their story, who is going to educate them? You or someone else outside of your family? Who's going to tell your children, your grandchildren, your story? That's something that we have to remember. And the ad that I have here that I'm sharing an example of is a former slave. After the Civil War, when slaves were able to go start searching for family members, there were thousands and thousands of ads in newspapers across the country. And these people were putting names, looking for their mothers or sisters, their cousin, whoever. They were looking in papers to try to track down relatives who were sold away during slavery. And I put one here. This is from Atlanta. This woman, he says she was taken, my sister was taken from Atlanta in 1862 by William Simpson. At the time, I was 7 years old, and I have not seen her since. Her name was Sarah Ann Simpson. Her mother's name was Matilda, and her name is Andrew Jackson Simpson. We were raised in White County, Tennessee, 4 miles west of Sparta. This is genealogical information. So if you are fortunate, even though it's a sad thing, to sad record to find, it's still a gold mine of information for your relatives. So we do have unique challenges for slavery or their records. You know, some people like to say, well, slavery is hard to find records, and that's not always true. Slavery was profitable. People made money from slaves, and slaves were purchased, and there were purchase records. Slaves were passed down from parents to children, as marriage gifts, as estates. So they're not as hard to find as people generally like to have us believe. So we do have unique challenges, but we do have unique resources as well. Our ancestors will help us, and we just have to try and start, and they will jump in. They will help us, just like they've helped me. So genealogy is not a hobby. It is required to piece your family together, because otherwise you won't know. If you don't step out and do it, you will not find these answers, because no one's going to hand these answers to you. It is a requirement to understand who you are. It is a requirement to understand the present, the current time that we live in. Understanding your genealogy, understanding your community, understanding your state, understanding your country can easily start with genealogy. And genealogy gives us the facts in hand, the documentation to prove our history, American history. And once you know your family story, your legacy, it cannot be dictated to you by others, and it can never be taken away from you. So if someone decides to burn all the archives down or close these records down, I don't like what these records say, I'm not happy with this library, and burn the library down, you will have your information, and it can't be stolen from you if someone tries to. All right, next slide, please. And I'll try to hurry up. I'm going into detail. So research strategies, as I mentioned, interview your family members. Sometimes relatives don't want to talk about painful past. Sometimes there's shame involved for whatever reasons. It's different family dynamics. For example, I asked my great-grandmother about the Great Depression. We went to go visit her after school one day, and we had talked about that in class. So I went to my grandmother, said, well, my great-grandmother said, well, did you know about the Great Depression? Did you live through that? And she busted out in tears. She started crying when I said the word Great Depression, because that's how hard it was. And to me, you know, a kid in high school, I was like, oh, Great Depression is like a history subject, a chapter in a history book. To her, it was lived experience. And so we have some sensitivity when you ask, some grace and compassion when you ask people about questions, because you never know how people are going to respond. So be thoughtful, be careful when you ask questions. You're asking about a terrible time. Well, how was, I don't know, civil rights movement? How was World War II? How was the Depression? Whatever it is, just be mindful of who you're asking, their composure, you know, their sensitivities when you're asking questions. And next research strategy is to formulate a question to kind of get yourself structured and guided. Formulate, what are you trying to do? Who is the mother of my great-grandmother is a question. Where was my paternal grandfather born? Who are my biological parents is a research question. So to get yourself focused and kind of get you pointed in the right direction, you want to have a question. And you can also go to genealogy websites. When you go to ancestry.com, for example, or Family Search, they're very good to start. It's a resource that's available to you, but you have to understand that America began as a rural, slave-based agrarian economy. And so early American records were generated primarily at the county level. Court records, lawsuits, probates, marriages, death, church records, slave bills of sale, those are local records. And these websites like Ancestry, they will digitized records. They will have records available, but they can't have everything because you can't digitize 400 years of record. You can't digitize from the 1600s to the 1900s or the 1890s, whatever it is. You can't digitize everything that's ever been generated in the history of the United States. And that's why also your kids have to learn cursive writing, because cursive writing is required in order to read all these documents. These centuries and centuries of American history are captured, are locked away in cursive writing. So I add that as well. And again, look in the right places, search records that are applied to the town, to the city, to the county of where your people are. And so you first have to determine where that is. And next slide, please. Lineage societies, tools and resources to kind of help you focus or just to go ask for help. Lineage societies are for people to join communities that to help practice your genealogy skills. And oftentimes societies have a specific focus for a membership and for a specific time frame. I'm in a Civil War society because I have a Civil War ancestor. You may have a 1812, War of 1812, when the British returned to the United States and burned down the White House. That was a war. You may have ancestors for that. You just never know. And even before that, you may have ancestors, you may have free people of color who were alive in the United States when the American Revolution started. And there are lineage societies for that. A friend of mine, Rick Murphy, started the Society of the First African Families of English America. And the reason he started that, because there are so many lineage societies, but not necessarily lineage societies geared toward African American research, African American history. So my friend Rick Murphy started a society that unites descendants, African Americans who lived in English America, not Spanish America, not French America, English America prior to 1770. He started that about 2 years ago. And another friend of mine, a DAR friend, started Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage. And I will have links to these sites if you're interested. I'm always recruiting membership for all my societies, all my friends' societies. But United States Middle Passage is for those who have documented their enslaved ancestor. There has never been a society for those of us who have enslaved ancestors. And my friend started one about 3 or 4 years ago, actually. And you find the information, you have a plaque, you can talk about your ancestor and get tips and research strategies from fellow descendants. Genealogy websites, I mentioned Family Search is free. Ancestry.com, there is a subscription. Libraries, you want to make friends with your libraries. You want to get to know what libraries are available to you. And you want to understand what records the library has. The National Archives has tons of information. If your state archives also, Georgia State has an archive. Every state in the union has an archive. I'm from Missouri. There's Missouri Archive, which is wonderful. University archives are also wonderful, wonderful options, because a lot of times universities have family papers. And family papers will discuss, for example, like people who owned slaves perhaps may have had a lot of money. They had wealth of documentation that they didn't want to throw in the trash, so they stay at universities. I think Emory may have some, but one of the more famous ones is LSU. Has a library of the plantation papers. And there are a series of plantation records from across the South that were scanned. And I'm not giving you the full name of the records, but they are scattered about in all the different universities. For family papers. And I found for my ancestors, I was able to determine who enslaved them. And I found out, and they were in Virginia, and the enslaver of my ancestor, their family papers are at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, for example. I found some in the Louisiana State University Library as well. I found letters, handwritten letters between people involved with my ancestors are saved in South Carolina, in the South Carolina Library, for example. So lineage societies, websites, libraries, archives, state archives, county archives. And next slide, please. I see we're at 5:45. So when you go to these libraries, you have to understand what they have, and it's very important that you review their catalog. And if you know what town you're looking for, you know what marriage records you're looking for, you need to research the library to make sure it has what it is you're looking for. Just because you go into a library and it's closest to your house and it's most convenient and that's the only way you can get to, does not mean that's a library for you. But libraries can do exchanges. If you see one library has information that's not convenient to you, you can request your library, find documents to transfer to your local library. Card catalogs, even though that's kind of old, mostly obsolete, they're still available. You never know what you can find in there. I don't know of any library that's thrown them out. Bibliography, see what books they have. But primarily when you find a new archive or a new library, I recommend looking at their finding aid, which is a detailed inventory or guide of archival materials, manuscripts. Which family's papers are they holding? So it's very important to get comfortable going through that, and it'll save you a lot of time. It'll save you a lot of gas, save you a lot of headache driving around. You can go through the finding aid to know if they have what it is that you need. And next slide, please. DNA testing is another option to help you in your search. A lot of times records are not available. And the only way to find out if you're connected to someone or to a family, or if your name is Jones, for example, you test your DNA, you want to know which Jones that you connect to. And this is a whole different talk, DNA. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to cover for DNA. But in summary, DNA helps us distinguish paternal and maternal connections, or maternal and confirmed family relationships. DNA helps us validate the paper trail that we have, but it does not replace research. It doesn't replace you going to the local county and finding the records to help explain your DNA matches. It helps you distinguish between if there's family members all of the same name, it helps you identify like which son you may descend from, which couple you descend from exactly. And DNA can help us find ancestors when paper records are missing. If they're destroyed, as I mentioned, it can help you match with distant cousin, help you identify new ancestors. Because if you find out yourself and you're at a brick wall for a particular ancestor, then you have cousins who all match to you and they're all in the same family, then that's a clue that that's your ancestor too, to help you explain how you match to them. So autosomal DNA is a type of DNA that's handled at ancestry.com. Y-DNA and all the other sites, 23andMe, I think my family search. Y-DNA, the paternal father to son, that's stable for many generations, hundreds, thousands of years even, that's Y-DNA. And that's primarily done at familytreedna.com. And Family Tree DNA also does mitochondrial DNA, which is the mother to children. mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, your mother can pass mtDNA down to her son and also to her daughter, but a son does not pass mitochondrial DNA down to his children. I think I got that right. But the mother can pass to her daughter can keep passing to her children through her daughter. But again, as I mentioned, DNA, yes, thank you, Ricardo. DNA needs a whole nother slide, a whole nother talk for all the different things and tools available for genetic research. So tips, starting to wrap up, be organized. Do not run yourself in circles repeating the same research like I do. I still do for whatever reason. Because you forgot you looked somewhere, record what you found, use a research log, write down what you found and keep it there and move on to something else. Also, when you do find a document, when you do find something valuable, you want to record it. I use a citation management tool, Zotero is the one that I use. And Zotero, and I believe we all went to Emory, so we've all written our papers, we all have done citation tools, but you can also use it personally for genealogy. But with a citation management tool like Zotero, for example, and again, I'm only picking that one. There's dozens of tools, but I picked that one because that's the one that I happened to figure out, that I was able to figure out the fastest. But Zotero integrates with Word. So when you're typing up your paper, you can hit the Zotero. There's an add-in in the bar for Zotero. You just type in your citation, the last digit, the last name or the book title. It'll bring it up and it'll slam it right there in your paper. And then you update it once. in the tool. So when you change it, it updates automatically throughout your document. So like I said, I probably don't have to explain to my Emory crew about citation management, but it does help you with genealogy and staying organized and staying tracked. And I also recommend that citations are critical if you plan on publishing if you're serious about this and you plan on publishing your genealogy. Or if you want to go to be a certified genealogist, you will have to be comfortable with citations. And your record should be, anyone should be able to access that same record where you say you found that record. And just get comfortable writing. And again, I will ask, if you don't write the story down, who will write the story down? And get comfortable speaking about your family. If you don't get up and speak about your family, you write the story down and you speak about it. If you don't speak these stories, who's going to speak these stories? How are your children going to learn these stories? And otherwise, if we're not comfortable writing our stories, if we're not comfortable speaking our stories, other forces will get comfortable telling you what your family history is. And if you don't know your history, if you don't write it, if you don't speak on it, other people will get comfortable doing it for you. And also seek out mentors. I have mentors. I had some wonderful mentors. Some have passed away. I have others. Have a mentor, have people who help. There's always people who want to help you in genealogy. I want to help as well because I understand that when you help others in genealogy, you end up helping yourself in your own research. Being helpful is helpful to you. I've always learned is the number one rule in genealogy. And lastly, in researching your family history, just remember that Black history is American history. And it's not impossible to find records for us. We just have to be creative, as we have for all types of things, but our records are available and they're available in all types of crazy places. I had a friend who found she was able to substantiate her ancestors' marriage through using a mortgage record because they applied for a mortgage. He said, "This is my wife." That was the only record she had that said her ancestors were married. Be encouraged, take action, put that one step in front of the other. Your ancestors will help you. Plan ahead also when you're visiting family, when you're going home, visit parents and grandparents, include a research stop at the archives or to the local courthouse. And consider doing DNA testing. Again, that's a whole different slide, but remember there's sensitivities with DNA testing. You do want to get as many relatives as possible, but there are risks to DNA testing that you have to mentally prepare for. There result unexpected results. And that's another topic, but you want to get as many people as possible, but you have to be prepared for unexpected results. Misspelled names when you're searching records. I was looking for a woman named Teresa. I couldn't find her, but the record had her death certificate as Torethia, Toretha, was how her name was transcribed. So you have to be careful of records that are transcribed. You always want to go for the original document and you transcribe it yourself. Do not rely on other people's transcription of your family's names and records. When you find records, make a copy of it, digitize it, keep it online, keep it in a drive, keep it in the cloud. Let's see. And remember that counties change names. You can have families that stayed in the same house 50 years, but the county line may have changed. The name of the city may have changed. The county line might have changed 3 times. So you have to be mindful of that also when searching in your records. And next slide. I want us to leave more time for questions. Next slide, please. And one of my favorite quotes, thank you all for having me today, and thank you all for attending today. I hope all of this, I kind of piled a lot in here. I'm sorry to have a lot of time for questions, but I hope this information was helpful. And I do have my contact information on another slide. But one of my favorite quotes, or this is a Bible verse, is look to the rock from which you were cut and to the quarry from which you were hewn. And that's how you know who you are, and that's how you'll know how to navigate life moving forward. And questions, and you can go to the last slide, the thank you slide that has my contact information, and I can ask questions in the 5 minutes that we have left. Thank you.
Hi, I do have a question. If I can jump in, I'm driving. Sorry, I can't see if anyone has a hand up.
Yeah, you go for it.
Okay. And I know you touched on using the different DNA services. Of course, I can read it. I'm driving, but what my question was is I know I've heard about certain ones. I can't think of if this name is probably not right, but they concentrate more on African ancestry. And I assume that they also capture, things outside of that, but that's what their speciality is.
Yes.
Do you have any insights on whether, that particular service is one that you would start with versus like, ones that kind of concentrate more on the
Yeah.
histories of other people?
Yes, I'm aware of that African ancestry. I have not tested with them. I've tested with Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, and Ancestry.com. I have not tested with African ancestry because my understanding is that when you're testing with DNA, there needs to be a certain number of markers. And in order to get, you need like minimal results, there's 12 marker results that you can get, there's 25 marker results, there's 67 marker results, and 167 marker results. To get a definitive picture of a match, you need as many markers as possible that all say the same thing. And my understanding, I haven't checked recently, my understanding that African ancestry I don't know, I think that autosomal test, they were only using 8 markers, I believe. And forgive me, it may not be correct. It may have dated, but my understanding that for the price point compared to the other companies, it appears from what I was told, what I understand, you were receiving less results, less definitive information for double the price or triple the price. But again,
Excellent information.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nina.
I just said excellent information. I'd like, thank you for giving me the reasoning behind it as well.
But I
Yes.
know a lot of African countries, there's a lot of a movement going now by African countries saying if you prove your markers that you match to a certain country, they will take tests from African ancestry. And I believe African ancestry only. So, it just depends on what your intent is, what you want to do with the results. So.
Understood. Understood. Thank you.
Nikki, there's a few questions in the chat too that I'll read. And next I see another hand up. I think it's Akisi. Sorry if I said that wrong. She has a question in the chat, and I'm gonna let you come on speaker if you have an additional one. What type of archives do state libraries possess?
State archives they are the repository, the official repository of the state, the records are generated by that state. So laws, procedural, there are state senate records. I know, for example, there were some, like in Virginia, for example, in order for a free person of color to remain free in the state of Virginia, they had to get approval from the state legislature. The legislature had to agree, so you had to file a petition in order to do that. So those are the types of records, but it's the state archives are the official repository of records generated by each individual state. And they all have, different records, but they will all have the minutes of just legislation, policy. Sometimes people have to testify in front of the state legislature, and records like that are captured also.
Awesome, thank you. Joe Williams said, are there libraries that you would recommend specifically in Atlanta to start with?
Oh, I never researched in Atlanta. It's so crazy because my family is not from Atlanta, so I never do anything in Atlanta. Emory, of course, Winthrop Library, of course. But the finding aids, there's a public library here, the public library downtown. Yes, thank you. Auburn Avenue Library is pretty good. I've been there, but just go through their finding aid and see what they have. But I would definitely, and remember, if they have something at that library, but you're in DeKalb or you're in Fulton County or you're in, I don't know, Cobb, they can do interlibrary loans and send documents from that library. So, but yes, I search where my family is, and I don't, as far as I know, don't have Georgia relatives yet discovered.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna read another question, but do you have a few minutes to stay for a few
I
more
can
questions?
stay. I'm
Okay,
more than happy
great.
to
Well,
stay.
everyone, if you want to stay on for a little while longer, you're welcome to do that. But if you have to go, we completely understand. Really quick before I stop the recording, I want to say again, Nikki, thank you so much for this. Thank you for coming and presenting. It was an honor to have you and learn from you. And we're gonna continue on with a few more questions.
You. I'm so happy. Again, thank you all for joining. I love talking about this. You can probably tell this is my passion, and this the importance of it is why I do this. So I'm happy to help.
Amazing.
I can't see the I'm not